Be my husband for 4 months, then leave, Delphine Sauvé said. She slid the papers toward me across her late father's desk like she was reviewing a vendor contract. On day 118, that same woman was in my son's bedroom at midnight, assembling a second-hand hockey net with an Allen key she'd never held before in her life, because she had promised him she would, and I learned something in that moment that no clause on any page could have predicted. She was never going to be able to leave us, and somewhere quiet inside me, I think I already knew I was never going to let her. The contract was 16 pages. The section that mattered was on page 12, halfway down, in language so smooth it must have cost her firm $1,000 to write. This arrangement shall be considered fulfilled and dissolved on day 120, at which point both parties will separate without claim, contest, or further obligation. 4 months. That was the deal. I'm a plumber. I've been one since I was 23, working out of a white Dodge Ram with Arnaud plumbing and mechanical stenciled on the side in dark blue letters. I take the jobs nobody wants in February, which in Calgary means every job, and I fix the things that go wrong inside the walls of houses that cost more than I will ever see in my working life. Burst supply lines, failed sump pumps, hot water tanks that choose the worst possible morning to give out. I've been inside homes that made my jaw loosen, and I've been inside homes where the drywall is soft with mold, and the family is cooking on a hot plate, and I do the work the same way in both. Honest, quiet, and I leave it cleaner than I found it. I have one helper, a guy named Steph, who's been with me 6 years and can diagnose a water hammer by listening through drywall, and I have a son named Hugo who is 8 years old and is, without any competition whatsoever, the best and most important thing I have ever done. Hugo's mother left when he was 2. I won't spend much time on that because the story I'm trying to tell you isn't about her. What matters is that she left and I stayed, and Hugo is mine, fully, completely, in every way that counts. He sleeps under a Flames blanket. He eats cereal in quantities that genuinely concern me. He carries a small carved wooden bear his grandfather made him in a coat pocket everywhere he goes, and he will tell you, with complete authority, that the bear is named Gerald and that Gerald has opinions. Some days driving to a job site in the dark at -20, with Gerald buckled into the cup holder, and Hugo asleep in the back seat in his hockey gear because we couldn't fit practice into the day any other way, I look at the road ahead and think, I could not possibly deserve this. And I mean that in the best way. The Sauvé job came in through the high-end property management company we'd been servicing for years. They called it an estate assessment and upgrade, which is the kind of language they use when the house is large enough that the word plumbing feels impolite. The address was in Mount Royal, the part of Calgary where the houses sit back from the street behind mature trees and wrought iron gates, where you don't hear traffic and you don't see the neighbors unless they intend to be seen. The man who'd owned it was Raymond Sauvé. If you follow the energy sector at all, you know the name. He'd built Sauvé Thermal Resources from a small casing and pipe operation in the 80s into a company that employed 4,000 people across Alberta. Self-made, hard-nosed, genuinely believed in the work. He died in October at 78, and now his house needed a full mechanical assessment before it was transferred into his estate, and that job was mine. I didn't know whose house it was until I pulled through the gate and saw the family crest above the front door, a compass, rose in wrought iron, the same logo I'd seen on the Sauvé Thermal building on 9th Avenue. The woman standing in the driveway when I arrived, clipboard under her arm, jaw set, wearing a wool coat that had probably cost 3 months of my gross revenue. That was Delphine Sauvé, Raymond's only child, 41 years old. According to everything I'd read in the Herald over the prior weeks, the new president and CEO of everything her father had built. She didn't say hello. She said, "You're 12 minutes early." That's fine. I have to be in Eau Claire by 2 o'clock. And then she turned and walked into the house and expected me to follow, which I did, because that's the job. Here is what I noticed about Delphine in those first hours, and I notice it because it matters for what came later. She didn't look at me, not directly. She gave me instructions, the basement, the utility room, the main floor bathroom that had been losing pressure since September, and she gave them in the direction of the room rather than at me, the way you'd talk to the walls if you trusted the walls to hear and comply. I was a tradesman who had arrived to perform a task, She was a CEO managing a logistics problem. There was no animosity in it. There was just no recognition. I've worked for people like that my whole career. It doesn't sting anymore, it's just weather. You note it and move on and do the job. What changed things happened on the third day, in the basement mechanical room. Raymond Sauvé had kept a workbench down there. I don't know if Delphine knew about it or had ever been down in that basement, but it was unmistakably his. Covered in the particular organized clutter of a man who worked with his hands for the pleasure of it, even after he no longer needed to. Old pipe fittings, a hand-stamped metal box with RS on the lid, a coffee can full of sorted screws, and on the wall above the bench, in a black frame, a faded photograph of a young man on a job site, maybe 25 years old, holding a pipe wrench, squinting into the prairie sun. Same jaw as Delphine, same set of the shoulders. He'd been a pipe fitter before he'd been a CEO. I hadn't known that. I found a small hard hat on the bench, the kind that would have fit a child, bright orange, with Sauvé written on it in black marker in the large, imprecise letters of a man writing something to be read from a distance. I picked it up and set it carefully, right side up, on the shelf above the bench, where it wouldn't get knocked and lost in whatever clearing out was coming. I didn't know Delphine was behind me until she spoke. He wore that until the company got too big for him to go to sites, she said. Her voice was different, lower, not quite steady. He always said once the lawyers outnumbered the guys in hard hats, the fun was over. I turned. She was standing in the doorway of the mechanical room, and something in her face had changed. Like a room that has been shut a long time, and someone has finally opened a window. That sounds like a man who knew what mattered, I said. She looked at the hard hat for a long moment. Most estate companies would have just boxed all of this. I'm not an estate company, and I didn't touch the bench. I just didn't want that to get lost in the shuffle. She looked at me then, actually at me, not at a point slightly above my forehead. It was the first time in 3 days. She nodded once and left without another word. But everything was different after that. She brought me a coffee on day 4. She asked on day 5 whether I'd found anything structurally concerning, and she asked it as a real question, not a delegation. And on the last day of the assessment, when Steph had packed the truck and I was writing up the report at the kitchen island, she came in and sat across from me and said she had something she needed to discuss. What followed was the strangest conversation of my life, delivered in the measured, unhurried cadence of a woman who had spent 20 years presenting to investors and trained herself never to sound uncertain even when she was. Raymond Sauvé, she explained, had been a complicated man, brilliant at building things, difficult to be close to, deeply proud of the company and, in his later years, quietly desperate about the fact that his daughter had poured every waking hour of her life into it at the cost of everything else. He had watched Delphine run the operations division for 15 years, and had never once in that time seen her take a real vacation, attend a wedding that wasn't for business, or bring anyone home to the house in Mount Royal. So near the end, he had done something that I suspect he believed was an act of love. He had written a condition into his estate. In order to inherit the controlling shares, not the title, not the salary, but the actual voting control that kept the board from selling the thermal division to a Texas firm that had been circling it for 2 years. Delphine had to be legally married within 6 months of his death. The marriage had to be in good faith and maintained for at least 4 months before the 6-month deadline. If it wasn't, full discretionary control passed to a subset of the board. That subset, Delphine explained in a voice that was absolutely flat and absolutely furious underneath the flatness, had already been in preliminary conversations with the American buyer. 4,000 jobs, the largest independent thermal operator in Western Canada, a workers' pension fund that Raymond had built into something real, the kind of thing you almost never see anymore in this sector. Gone, sold, scattered. My father thought he was nudging me toward building a life, she said. What he actually did was hand the people who want to strip this company to its bones a 6-month window and a loaded gun. She looked at me across the island. I am not going to fall in love on a schedule written by a dead man. I want to be clear about that. What I can do is fulfill the letter of what he wrote. A legal marriage maintained for the 4 months required for the board's good faith review, then dissolved cleanly and quietly once the shares have transferred. I need someone discreet, someone with genuine character. Because the people watching will be looking hard for anything that doesn't hold up, and someone who actually needs what I can offer in return. Then she named a number. I'm not going to tell you the number. What I'll tell you is that it was enough to retire the line of credit I'd been carrying for 3 years since I bought out the previous owner of my business. Enough to put Hugo through university twice over. Enough that my van could get new brake pads and I could maybe look at a second truck. Enough that a man raising a child on his own, without a safety net, does not get to feel too proud to sit with. But I almost said no anyway. I almost said no because I've made a quiet promise to myself since Hugo was small, that I would live in a way I could explain to him someday without looking at my shoes. No corners cut, no arrangements dressed up as something they aren't, a straight line from who I am to what I do. What changed my mind was something Delphine said when she saw me hesitating. The CEO in her slipped for just a second, and underneath it was something tired and almost human. I'm not asking you to deceive anyone who matters to you, she said. I'm asking you to help me protect 4,000 jobs and the pension fund those people have paid into for 20 years, because my father made a mistake trying to manage my personal life from beyond the grave. That is what this actually is, under all the legal language. Help me fix his mistake, then walk away set. So I signed. There was one thing Delphine had not factored into the arrangement: Hugo. I had explained on signing day that I had a son and that he would need to be part of whatever residential arrangement we made, because I don't leave him. On that point there was no negotiation. She had agreed in the tone of someone approving a minor logistical consideration. Then Hugo walked into the Mount Royal house on move-in day, with Gerald the wooden bear in his coat pocket and a hockey bag over one shoulder, stopped dead in the entryway, and looked straight up at the ceiling. "Dad," he said loudly, "Dad, there's a skylight." I watched Delphine recalibrate in real time. She looked at this 8-year-old boy who had just brought 40 kilograms of hockey gear into her marble foyer, and I could see her deciding, in that particular executive way she had, what the appropriate response was. She crouched down, not smoothly, not like she'd done it much, and said, "There are 2 rooms upstairs with skylights, actually. One has a view of the mountains on a clear day. You can pick whichever one you want." Hugo considered this with the gravity of a summit meeting. "What's in the other one right now?" "Nothing," she said. "It's empty." "Can it be a practice area?" he said, "for shots?" A long pause, a practice for shots, in the house. "Not with a real puck," he said very reasonably. "We'll discuss parameters," she said. He reached over and took her hand and pulled her toward the stairs to show her where he thought the net could go. And I stood alone in the foyer of a house worth more than everything I'd ever earned, and felt the first real crack in my certainty that this was only paperwork. I'll be honest with you about the months that followed, because the honest version is so much stranger, and so much better than what you're probably expecting. For the first long stretch, it was exactly what it was supposed to be. 2 adults sharing a large house, a legal status, and nothing else. Delphine worked the kind of hours that meant I sometimes didn't see her between Sunday night and Thursday morning. I kept the business running. I wasn't going to sit in her house and become a kept man. I had a van and a client list and Steph to pay, and that was mine. And Hugo went to school and hockey and rode along with me on Saturdays the way he always had, except now we drove home to a house with a skylight. We were polite. We performed marriage convincingly for the specific audience who needed to see it. A company dinner in November, a charity gala in December, where I wore the one blazer I own, and she did not once make me feel like that wasn't sufficient. We were convincing, I think, because we were both fundamentally honest people, trying to do an honest thing inside a dishonest structure, and that reads differently than an actual lie. What I had not accounted for was Hugo. Hugo's mother left when he was 2. He doesn't remember her, not really, not in any way he could describe, but a boy who grows up without a mother is, I've come to understand, always quietly looking, not consciously, not in a way he could tell you about. Just this low-frequency search running underneath everything else. And he found what he was looking for, of all the impossible places in the world, in Delphine Sauvé. It started with the hockey net. She had promised him one evening in early November, when I was finishing a late call in Airdrie, that she would assemble the second-hand net I'd picked up on Marketplace. I came home at 11:30 to find her sitting cross-legged on his bedroom floor, instruction sheet in one hand, Allen key in the other, and Hugo directing operations from his bed in the tone of a coach with serious doubts about his assistant. "That piece goes left," he said. "It's the left post." "I'm aware it's the left post," she said. "I'm resolving a torque issue." "What's torque?" "It's why this is taking longer than it should." She got the net together, at midnight on a Tuesday. Because she had promised, and Delphine does not break promises. After that, Hugo waited up for her. I caught him doing it multiple times, lying in bed with the light off, and Gerald tucked under his arm, listening for the sound of her key in the door, and when she came in, he'd call down the hall, "Delphine, I'm still awake." And she would come in and sit on the edge of his bed and give him a summary of her day in the same precise cadence she used for board presentations, and he would ask questions that made no sense, and she would answer every single one of them with complete seriousness. She started coming home earlier. The woman who had worked 18-hour days her entire adult life started closing her laptop at 7. She started making sure she was there when Hugo got off the school bus on the days I had jobs that ran late. She learned the name of his teacher, the name of his best friend, the precise location of Gerald in the hierarchy of things that mattered, which is to say supreme and non-negotiable. One evening in January, I came home to find her at the kitchen table helping Hugo with a social studies project on the fur trade. She was explaining the economics of the Northwest Company in a way that almost certainly exceeded the grade 3 curriculum. And Hugo was eating it up, because Hugo had turned out to have a deep and abiding interest in how things get built. How one man's idea becomes 4,000 jobs. I stood in the doorway for a long time before either of them noticed me. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, Delphine and I started talking, really talking, late at night after Hugo was down, the kind of conversation you can only have in a quiet house in the dark after the day is finally over. She told me about her father, the man who'd been a pipe fitter before he was a CEO, who had built something genuinely real and then slowly lost the ability to speak to his own daughter without it becoming a performance review. She told me he had been proud of her in a language she could never quite translate, and how she'd spent her whole life straining toward a fluency she never fully reached. I told her about Hugo's mother and the long, strange, not entirely ungrateful process of discovering that my life was cleaner and quieter without her in it, and what it had cost me to admit that without guilt. We were two people who had each organized their grief into something functional, and we recognized each other across that dark kitchen the way you recognize someone speaking your native language in a foreign country. That is, the one thing no lawyer can write into a contract. It just happens to you, or it doesn't. But here is the thing I am most proud of from those 4 months. I never forgot the date. Day 120 lived in my chest the entire time like a stone I'd swallowed. Cold, heavy, always present. I lay awake more nights than I will tell you about, sick with the knowledge that I had walked Hugo straight into a second loss and held the door open for him, that I had let my son spend 4 months wrapping his whole heart around a woman who had signed a legal document committing to disappear from his life on a specific morning. That fear kept my feet on the ground even on the nights when everything in me wanted to lift off the floor. So around day 90, I did the thing that cost the most. I started, gently, preparing Hugo for the fact that we would be moving back to our own place soon, our own kitchen, our own routines, and I started pulling back from the kitchen table conversations, putting the wall up quietly, one brick at a time, before the date arrived to knock it all down for me. Delphine noticed. Of course she noticed. She is one of the most perceptive people I have ever met. She didn't say a single word about it. Which brings me to day 118. I was in Hugo's bedroom packing. He was at school. Day 119 was tomorrow, 120 was the day after. I had the same cardboard boxes I use every week of my working life, and my hands were doing what hands do when the rest of you doesn't know what else to do. Moving, folding, labeling, treating the unbearable thing like it's a job. A man can get through almost anything on this earth if he can convince himself long enough that it's only a job. Delphine was supposed to be at the Eau Claire office. She was standing in the doorway. She watched my hands for a long time, long enough that I became very focused on the folding. "You don't have to do that today," she said. "Tomorrow's 1/19, I said to the shirt in my hands. "Day after is move-out. Better to start." "I know when day 120 is. I wrote the date into the contract." "Then you know the schedule." A silence. "Curtis." I kept folding. "Curtis, stop." I stopped. I set the shirt down. I straightened and looked at her. Delphine Sauvé, who had held her grief at gunpoint for 2 years, who had never once in 4 months asked me for a single thing she hadn't already outlined in a document, who negotiated 9-figure deals without her pulse changing, stood in the doorway of my son's bedroom with an expression I had never seen on her face. Open. Completely, terrifyingly open. "Don't go," she said. "I'm asking you not to go." The room was very quiet. "The clause is satisfied," I said. "The shares transfer on day 120. The jobs are protected. The pension fund is safe. That was the whole thing, start to finish." "I'm not talking about the clause." "Delphine." "I'm not talking about the clause." Her voice broke in half on the second saying of it. "I'm asking you, you and Hugo, I'm asking you to stay." Every part of me wanted to cross that room in 2 steps and say yes. Before she'd finished the sentence, obviously yes. But I had an 8-year-old boy's entire heart sitting somewhere in that house, and I had my own long, hard-won knowledge of what it does to a person, what it had done to me. To be stayed with for the wrong reasons. To be kept out of convenience or the fear of a quiet house. I'd lived inside that once, before Hugo, and I knew the particular hollowness of it from the inside out, how it starts to feel like kindness and ends up feeling like a verdict. I was not going to do that to Hugo. I was not going to hand my son a parent who was staying because the alternative was loneliness. So I said quietly, "Not like this." She flinched as though I'd struck her. "Listen to me," I said, "all the way to the end. Because this matters more than anything else I'm going to say to you." And I told her. I told her about being someone's obligation once, a long time ago, and what it had cost me to understand the difference between being wanted and being kept. I told her that I had watched Hugo love her, genuinely, without strategy or agenda, the way only a kid can love somebody. And I was not going to let that become the reason she stayed. A child's love is not a lease agreement. "I'm not a problem you're solving," I said. "I'm not an asset you're retaining. I've been both of those things for other people, and I know exactly what it looks like from inside it, and I will not be that for you. And I will not let Hugo be that for you either. That little boy has already lost one parent. I am not going to hand him a second one who is staying, because the rooms feel too large and too quiet without us in them." She was crying by then, quietly, without drama, just tears running down a face that had been closed for so long and was now entirely unguarded. "So I need you to do something," I said, and I made my voice gentle then, because the hard part was done and this part wasn't a wall, it was a door. "I need you to stop being Delphine Sauvé, president and CEO, making a strategic decision about resource retention. I need you to be a person standing in a doorway, and I need you to tell me what you actually want. Not what's efficient, not what's smart, not what solves the problem, what you want, in your own words, with nothing around it, no contract, no clause, no number, just the true thing. If it's real, if what you want is us, me and Hugo as your actual family freely, because you choose it and not because you're afraid of the silence, then say that to me out loud. And if you can say the true thing, I promise you I am not going anywhere." She stood there for a long time. And then she did the single bravest thing I have ever watched another human being do. She stopped performing. The executive simply went, like a coat sliding off her shoulders onto the floor. And what was left standing there was a 41-year-old woman who had spent her whole armored life so afraid of needing other people that she had very nearly missed the only family she was ever going to truly want. "I love you," she said. "Both of you. I don't know how to say that without feeling like I've handed someone a liability, because that's how I've been trained to think about need. But it's true. I was alone in a way I didn't even know was lonely until a plumber set my father's hard hat somewhere it wouldn't get lost in the shuffle, because he thought it mattered to somebody. I was alone until an 8-year-old boy told me with complete seriousness why Gerald the bear is afraid of the garage. I don't want this house to go quiet. I don't want to go back to board meetings and 12-hour days and going to sleep to the sound of nothing. I am not asking you to stay because it's convenient. I'm asking because I cannot picture my life without the two of you in it, and that terrifies me more than losing the company ever could. That is the true thing. That is all of it. Please stay. So I stayed. I want to be clear about what came after, because this isn't a movie, and we didn't ride off anywhere. We did it the right way, the slow way, the way two people who have both been hurt and both built walls and both raised children to believe in straight lines actually do things. We saw a counselor together, a good one in Inglewood, who didn't flinch at the word contract and had a lot of sensible things to say about grief and identity and the difference between choosing and defaulting. We took it one true week at a time, and some of those weeks were hard, and we kept going. We got married again the following September, a real one this time, small, 12 people, in the backyard of the Mount Royal house, with the Rockies clear on the horizon the way they only are in the fall. Hugo was the ring bearer and wore a clip-on tie, and Gerald the bear attended in his coat pocket, with the collar folded out for the occasion. The first marriage had been on paper. The second one was on purpose. That is the entire difference, and it is the only one that has ever mattered. I kept the business, every bit of it. I wasn't going to become someone's kept man, and Hugo was going to grow up watching a father who worked for a living, who drove a white van with his name on the side, and came home with grease on his knuckles, and was proud of both those facts. Delphine and I compromised on one thing. She invested in a second truck and a third crew member. I run it. Those are the terms, and we have both been satisfied with them ever since. Hugo has a mother now. I need to say that again because it still stops me sometimes in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. My son, who rode along in that van since before he could read, who slept in hockey gear in the back seat on winter mornings, who has carried Gerald in his coat pocket for 6 years. Because that bear is the last thing his grandfather made before his hands got bad. My son has a mother. One who shows up. One who learns the names of things that matter to him. One who will put together a hockey net at midnight on a Tuesday, because she made a promise and she does not break promises. That is the whole prize. Everything else is paperwork and signatures. One last thing before I let you go. Delphine spent 40 years building armor so airtight that the love she actually needed could not get in from any direction. And it took losing her father, and standing completely undone in a doorway, for her to finally say one true thing out loud without a contract wrapped around it to keep her safe. I think about how close we came to missing each other, how easy it would have been for me to drop what was in my hands the moment she said, "Don't go," cross the room, say yes, and let us both off the hook. And never know, not really, whether she meant any of it. There's a version of day 118 where I do exactly that, and maybe it even works out fine. But there is no version where I do that and also get to know, all the way down, that she chose us because she wanted to, and not because the room scared her. I picked the true thing. I would pick it every single time. So here is what I want to know from you tonight. Delphine spent her entire life so heavily armored, she almost missed the only family she ever actually wanted. Because asking for things out loud felt like surrender, and needing other people felt like the most dangerous weakness there was. It took losing everything and standing bare in a doorway for her to finally say the one true thing without a safety net under it. When was the last time you said yours? The scary one, the bear one. The one you keep translating into something more manageable before it comes out of your mouth. Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story got to you tonight, if you believe what I've come to believe, that saying the true thing out loud is the single bravest thing a guarded person can ever do, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Drop a like so the next person can find their way here. And I'll see you in the very next one. Trust me, it's a good one.